National Security and the War on Terror, next on International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs at UWM and Milwaukee Public Television present International Focus, a global magazine linking Wisconsin and the world.
Welcome to International Focus. I'm Robert Ricigliano, Director of the Institute of World Affairs at UWM. Since the September 11th attacks, the Bush administration's national security policy has been framed as a war on terror. Supporters point to the absence of another serious terrorist incident as evidence that the policy is keeping America safe. Critics argue it has eroded civil liberties and damaged U.S. standing in the world. Is the war on terror working? Or has our preoccupation with terrorism prevented us from responding to equally serious security threats? To help us explore national security options for the next American president, we're joined by David Shorr, Program Officer at the Stanley Foundation, whose work focuses on national security strategy and the U.S. role in the world. Previously, he worked in Washington on a range of issues, including arms control, humanitarian crisis response, conflict resolution, and human rights. David, welcome to International Focus.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, I want to ask you, which I think in some ways is a simple question, but also maybe the most difficult question, which is when the president says the war on terrorism, when his critics say the war on terrorism, what do they mean? I mean, how do we define the war on terror?
Well, you raised the question of whether we should consider the lack of a major terrorist attack on American soil to be a success. And I would say that we should regard that as a success, but I think successful because of the very basic fundamental things that of course you do about terrorism and terrorists. You always want to, I don't think there's any controversy around this, you want to find them, catch them, stop them. But the war on terror, a lot extra, and a lot of other ideas kind of get loaded into the mix, and that's where some of the overreaction and some of the counterproductive policies come in.
Some people have talked about the war on terrorism as a way of, like the Cold War, a way of defining the sort of existential threat facing the United States. Is that what we're talking about?
I don't think so. I'm not sure I understand how you can compare these networks, dangerous and violent as they are, to the Soviet Union and the Soviet bloc. There are a few orders of magnitude in between there in terms of the size of these threats. In some ways, I think we are building the terrorists up, at least in how we view them, how we think of them, building them up into much more than we should. And in some ways, I wonder if we're not kind of playing into their hands. I mean, I view Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda as sort of the self-appointed spokespeople of the clash of civilizations. Really kind of self-important when really they're just killers who attack civilians and operate in the shadows and just kind of pure destruction. Even thinking them as warriors, is also to give them credit that they don't deserve. You mentioned that in some ways we're making them more important than they are. Is that basically then implying that the threat is not there or is not as serious as we think? It's not that the threat isn't serious, because it is. It's very hard to track down. This is difficult stuff. It's serious stuff. The stakes are high. What I'm talking about when I say we go too far is the idea that somehow this is an existential threat, that this is a threat to our viability as a society. And I don't think it is at that level. And I don't think that we should be looking at the world in the same kind of Cold War way. If if we really believe that this is just the marginal extreme, then it's kind of inconsistent to build them up into a massive movement. So I wonder why we aren't doing more in the vein of kind of divide and conquer, more in the way of splintering and discrediting and that kind of thing than kind of hyping ourselves up as if this is the challenge of our time. Because frankly, to the extent that we do look at this as the challenge of our time, we're going to take the eye off the ball of some other pretty serious challenges.
I want to talk some more about what you see as those challenges, but I am taken back a little bit to John Kerry when he was running for president, and he made the comment in one of the debates, we should treat this as any other sort of criminal activity or something to that effect, and got a lot of heat for that, justified or unjustified. Has the discourse changed? Has the thinking changed now, though, more in line with the put this threat in a better perspective?
I think it's in the process of changing. The change that I'm looking for, as I say, it's a serious threat and it needs to be dealt seriously. I just want us to get more into that practical mode of focusing on what's going to be effective, rather than what's going to make us feel as if we're being tough enough. I'm also perplexed by this idea that, it's definitely not law enforcement. And the only problem I can think with that idea is that it doesn't sound tough enough. But if we're objective, let me talk about one or two things. The most effective agency in the United States in investigating terror networks, finding information, is the New York Police Department, right? And so which does a lot of the. I mean, it's not a war. I mean, war is you meet an enemy force to force. This is, as I say, hunting down, following the leads, following the money and the financial trails. So, if we need to say we have an adversary, if we need to say we face a serious threat, that's fine. But a lot of it is really just kind of down to earth. Let's go find them and get them.
So let's talk some about what are some of the costs then. What are some of the costs of this overemphasis on a particular threat at the expense of others?
Sure. Well, one of them is that when we talk about Islamic extremists, I know that officials and many of us were always careful to say that that it's the extremes, that we're not in a conflict with Islam or the Islamic world or Muslims, and we mean that. But as the superpower, we have to be mindful of what the perception is. So we may be saying extremists, we may be making that point about the contrast with moderates. I think a lot of people are hearing Islamic. So that's one problem. The other problem is here we are, the most powerful nation in the world, and as we confront this threat, we have made so much of our policy about that threat. And so we have so much of our dealings with the world, asking, what they've done for us lately in confronting this threat. And it seems out of proportion, as I was saying before, about what America's total interests are and total challenges are. And B, it doesn't give the rest of the world a strong sense of all being in it together. Yes, terrorism is a problem faced by, so many countries, most countries, many countries. And yet, we don't have that sense. We don't have that sense of the world against these outlaw bandits. Instead, we have this sense that the rest of the world is being asked to do what America wants because America feels threatened by it. And the other parts of the world may feel like they have much more urgent problems. And so that's not helping with our legitimacy. Just the way our treating detainees isn't helping with our legitimacy. I think we should be, and maybe this relates to your question about the evolution and the debate. I think we should be reaching the place where we're conscious enough that legitimacy matters. If there's all of this resentment around the rest of the world toward the United States, that's really going to get in our way of some of the things that we want, cooperating on some of the things that we and the rest of the world want.
We talked with Stephen Cull recently of the Program on International Policy Attitudes at the University of Maryland, and they've done lots of polling in Muslim countries, and they bear out exactly what you're saying, which is that people hear war on Islam when they hear war on terror. But the retort maybe from many would be, well, look, we're talking about a significant threat, again, maybe more significant than it actually is, so we have to make some trade-offs. And these are some of the trade-offs we make. Maybe we don't do all we want to do on climate change, or we don't do everything we should be doing in Africa and Darfur, but that's just what we have to do.
Well, we need to be mindful of the other trade-offs at the same time. That's the thing. As I say, there's so much you can and should do, have to do, that's basic, that isn't controversial. For instance, the world not only understood immediately, but supported immediately the fact that the United States had to retaliate against Afghanistan after September 11th, right? So I don't think there's that it costs. I think the costs are more on the side of if we get too wound up, too frenetic, and overreact. I think there are more costs to that than there are to those things that we wouldn't do if we're not overreacting, if we're not wound up. Many things that are actually counterproductive, alienating.
We're talking with David Shorr from the Stanley Foundation about the war on terrorism and U.S. national security. We'll be right back after this short break.
The Institute of World Affairs presents our community with a range of public programs relating to global issues, U.S. foreign policy, and the world economy. For more information about the Institute of World Affairs, call 414-229-3220 or visit our website at www.iwa.uwm.edu.
Welcome back to International Focus. We're talking with David Shorr about the war on terrorism and national security policy. And David, before the break, we began to get into some of those trade-offs that maybe we're not considering when we talk about prosecuting the war on terror. And maybe you can continue on talking about that.
Yeah, I think we do. We need to be mindful of our image and why it's important. We need to be mindful of how we stand in relation to everyone else in the world. And let me just say three really important reasons, I think, that we need to be in sync with the rest of the world on a lot of these things. We're not always going to agree. There's going to be a particular American perspective. We have our own interests. But number one, I think eventually there's a counterterrorism cost, right? I think eventually if the United States gets more unpopular, it's going to be more difficult for other governments to cooperate with us in counterterrorism. I don't know about other people, but I know I find it very unnerving when I watch elections in other countries and people win by being, distancing themselves from America. That's a caution. The second reason is that so much of what America wants, so much of what is in our interest, is also in the wider global interest. a strong global economy. Having, as the world shrinks and grows more interconnected, having that, lift all boats economically, having that shared sense of stake in a healthy global economy. And that sense of a common purpose, of a common cause, I think is what we should, what we need to regain. And then, third of all, that's going to be more effective in dealing with many of these problems, whether they're globalization and the economy, or whether they're global warming and the environmental consequences of a growing economy, or whether it's stemming the spread of nuclear weapons to more and more countries. So, there's a lot more at stake with America's image, America's legitimacy, than just some kind of popularity contest.
I want to go to bring in the book project that you worked on that the Stanley Foundation supported, Bridging the Foreign Policy Divide. And it was a unique effort to try to pair authors from a conservative and a liberal perspective to address key issues.
Foreign policy wonks coming together.
As only they could. But especially on the war on terrorism, seems like it's one of those oil and water kind of things where the two positions just can't mix. It's either the existential threat or it's a distracting, counterproductive, overreaction. How did people come together on that? How did they find common ground on that issue?
You asked before about whether there are shifts in the political mood in the country, and I think there are. I guess that's one of the strengths of America, is the ability of our political system to regenerate, to course correct. And I have been bringing people from the right and left together into bipartisan discussions in a number of ways. We have the Bridging the Foreign Policy Divide book, which is sort of a Noah's Ark, 2 by 2, on 10 different issue areas. You had a liberal and a conservative saying what their points of agreement are. But even closer to what we're talking about here today, we had a group consensus building, again, bipartisan exercise out in rural Virginia. And one of the main themes was to put the war on terror, if you want to call it that, into a bigger context. Which is a long way of saying that, yes, there has been a shift in mood. There is a possibility for being self-reflective and correcting.
Because at one point there was no bigger context.
Right. That's right.
That's a very interesting shift.
Yeah, and so I think what we need to be mindful of is when we think of that perspective of you have to do anything and everything, you have to work the dark side, as the Vice President has put it. We really should be thinking of that perspective as a minority perspective, and I'm sure Stephen Cull is probably finding that to be true as he polls these things. So if that existential threat idea, do whatever it takes, is, as I see it, maybe 25-28% of the public, that leaves a lot of the rest, including Republicans, including conservatives, and I think everyone's eyes are open, and so in that spirit of America being a pragmatic nation, of being aware of realities, I think there is a new consensus that says that there is such a thing as overreacting, that detainee treatment and other things have very seriously damaged our reputation, and there's a need to get things back into perspective, back into proportion, and back into a sense of working, with the world instead of at cross purposes.
Are there particular initiatives, other things that they would say the United States should do, or there's agreement that the United States should do or should stop doing?
I think there are a few things. One is because of this problem that globalization is not lifting all boats, it's leaving some people behind. Because there's an awareness that there could be new protectionist sentiments to try and put up trade barriers. Part of this bipartisan consensus is, we need to improve how globalization is treating everyone, to make sure that it's not leaving a lot of people behind. And so you have a belief that there has to be greater attention and investment in the developing world in development. Those are our future customers. Those are our future partners. And so and we need to create that sense of one world all being in it together. That's part of it. There's also an awareness that as great as the American military is, and it is, as capable, as dedicated, there's an imbalance in terms of the military versus civilian face that we put to the world. The military are the first to tell you, we don't want to have to be stuck doing everything. Where is that political context? I mean, military who've all studied their Clausewitz knows that military has to be serving some clear political purpose. And so one of the things that needs to be done urgently also is to rebuild that civilian capacity to deal with the world, to deal with the world's problems, because it's really been left fallow. So that's those are some of the ideas, and then of course resolving the detainee situation is so urgent because of the cost to our legitimacy.
One of the potential benefits of the war on terrorism as a paradigm is it gives you that kind of simplistic kind of touchstone that this is going to be the priority that trumps all other priorities. If that's not going to be the priority, say, for the next U.S. president or the paradigm for the next U.S. president, are people talking about, well, what would take its place? Because you're talking about lots of multiple threats here, and I see them all as important, but not seeing what's the one sentence sort of paradigm.
Well, maybe I can reach to this statement that we negotiated and co-drafted, written by a committee of 14 or 15, all engaged, active, many specialists who are advisors to presidential campaigns. We came up with ideas like this larger struggle of ideas, this bigger context. We said it pits the empowerment of people against the concentration of power. It pits openness to change against nostalgia for an idealized past. And if you can read between the lines, maybe you can hear how we really see Al-Qaeda, how we really see Osama bin Laden, and the clash of civilizations versus universal ideals. So we want to win this so-called war, not by catching every last terrorist, because there are so many. We catch as many as we can, we stop as many as we possibly can, but we also attend to how many there are going to be, the so-called, the recruitment question that Rumsfeld raised. How many more terrorists are there going to be? And so victory, if you call it that, comes when that sense of kind of the global law-abiding majority, the growing global middle class, gets so strong, that you have kind of the moderate world, the you know, the not fighting change world, the not trying to dominate people world, you know, grows and strengthens, and those extremists do become more and more marginalized, lose appeal, and lose recruits. And so maybe that's the kind of idea that you're asking about.
We have just about a minute left, and I'm wondering if you could reflect a little bit on the initiative of bridging the foreign policy divide and building this consensus, and how it may fare in going into the next election season when people tend to be polarized. So if you just in a bit, how do we deal with that?
It sort of loops back to what I was saying about the beginning. We need a very practical way of looking at things. We need to be down to earth and be thinking about effectiveness and how things really work. So when the policy specialists from across the political divide came together, we're coming together with that, in touch with things, how things actually work, and wanting to be effective rather than just scoring political points. So if we can have a discussion that's oriented more that way in this election season, I think that would do a lot of good.
David Shorr, thank you very much. And David Shorr from the Stanley Foundation, thank you for your thoughts on war and terror and bridging the foreign policy divide. To our viewers, we'll see you next week on International Focus.
For information about the Institute of World Affairs and its many programs, or to become a member of the Institute, call 414-229-3220 or visit us at our website,